So let's take a look at these unhelpful strategies which some of us have unintentionally been lured into over the years of our lives, or it might just be a present situation. Here goes. An unhelpful strategy, first up, looking at self-care. Another buzzword that seems to be going around a lot recently, and it's contradictory because a lot of the time self-care gets us too overly focused on the self, and a lot of the marketing seems to be centred around pampers or beauty boosting activities or vanity or treating yourself, and that would be first of all one of the downfalls if you already perceive self-care as what is projected at us in the media, a luxury or a trend, and only for those that have got time and energy and money to spend. That can really be off-putting, and we think that it doesn't really fit with us. So it's important just to question these thoughts around self-care and realign with them, and the idea that in order for you to give and contribute to our community, to our work, to our families, to our friends, and to our life so that it's fully enjoyed, you need to be able and equipped with all of the strategies to self-care in the best way possible. And that's coming away from all of the cliches and looking at self-care in a way that works for you and your individuality. Escapism and avoidance. This is a huge one because it's really easy for us to just want to bury our heads in the sand. We also are surrounded by so many options which can lure us into a state of escapism and avoidance. And when I talk about avoidance, I'm talking about avoiding a situation, a person, or a task that is just filling you with dread or making it feel like it's an anxious situation or it's not going to result in a feel-good factor. And the more that we avoid it, the more that it is created in our minds as a huge thing. And when we come to a state of being ready to face small fears and facing them in good time, not letting things go stagnant, not letting them weigh you down for too long, you will be able to free up so much more of your time and your worries. And of course, it might actually result in a resolution which is quite pleasant, and it's quite surprising how it works out. So it's important to get out of a state of avoidance. When you're in a state of avoidance or you're looking for escapism, you can also be predominantly centred around dopamine-seeking activities. So dopamine-seeking activities are all about things that give us a short-term buzz rather than long-term fulfilment. They might feel good at the time. They might make you feel like you've averted yourself from a crisis, but unfortunately what happens with dopamine usually is when it expires, we're left with a bit more of a reality hit, and some of the dopamine seeking activities can actually make your reality a bit more of a weight on you, and some of the consequences of that follow can make things feel a little bit worse on the other side. So some of these seeking behaviours would be impulse spending, retail therapy. Although there's a place for that and having a little bit of a buzz, it can be something that many lean towards in order to feel some sort of stress relief. We've also got binge eating, the chemicals in our foods which help us feel a little bit of that dopamine, and we're looking for serotonin and we're finding it in all the wrong ways, something that is again short term and might not be impacting our health in the way that we would want it to. When we're looking at things like gut imbalance and we're looking at weight management, it can then have a knock-on effect on those aims that we have for ourselves. Excessive exercise is mentioned here as well, because contrary to the advice that seems to be mainstream about exercise being a healthy distraction, you can also go to extremes with this. So when you are looking to compensate for the way you're feeling, you can over-exercise to the point where you are no longer seeking the contentment within. You're using and leaning on a certain activity in order for that feel-good hormone to be pumped around your body. And some people can get into quite a fixation and quite an obsession with exercise, toning of the body, looking for validation in the goals that they've achieved. And it's important just to get the balance between high impact exercise and low impact activity in your life, which is just as important. Validation seeking, again, is a huge one, especially in these times that we live in, where we seem to be relying on external reassurance. And a lot of that can take you onto your phone, and again, you are wasting time and energy looking for ways in which you feel reassured and in which you are feeling valid by the number of likes, the number of comments, and any feedback that you receive. And of course, this puts you into a kind of vulnerable zone, because if you are not gaining the feedback which you hoped for, again, you are placing your worth on how others perceive you or how you feel others perceive you. Compare yourself to everything that you see others are up to. Compare yourself to body shapes and sizes, and compare your lives to what you think others' lives are all about, instead of realising it's one captured moment in time and it's selected words and its selected projections. Because again, it's not a reality. The cyber world is another realm, and it doesn't represent our real lives. And it's more and more important that we start to do things that make us feel valid within ourselves and build our self-worth and build our own confidence with our own activities and our own connection within our reality. And we get to choose that reality in our everyday lives. High achieving mode, again, is something that I speak about in the next clip about adrenal response, but many of us have managed to get ourselves into a zone of feeling great whenever we achieve our goals, and it's all a great stimulant for confidence. It's great for feeling that we can achieve things in our life, no matter what our backgrounds, no matter what our circumstances we may have, we can learn to overcome. And of course, there comes a great euphoria with that and a real feeling of pride. However, we need to remember that if we place too much emphasis on achieving, we are forgetting about how we can feel enough. It's worth a mention as well that although dopamine, again, is a short-term act of pleasure and it touches only 5 brain receptors, it can be addictive. And this is why you tend to see some people who are looking at these strategies to manage stress or manage their feelings and their low vibration. It never feels like it's enough. And that's why you feel the need to tap in more and more. It actually causes a brain altering effect, because the more that you are doing these activities, the less of a buzz that you get, because you begin to normalize it and your brain adapts. And then you need more and more, much like an addiction to drugs. You can feel that you need more of this particular activity, which is not conducive to long-term happiness. And you'll never really feel that you can fill that void, or your life will be overtaken with dopamine-seeking activities. So it's much better to look at ways to build your serotonin levels, which really bring a more long-term satisfaction. And it does actually have more of an affinity with the brain, it's non-addictive, and it's more consistent, and it's more sustainable. It also helps you to find ways in which to be content no matter what the circumstances are. You have less of the extreme highs and less of the crashes of the lows after the dopamine kick. If you're not finding that your sleep hygiene is in a good space, this will really impact your mood, not to mention your energy levels and your ability to tolerate. So it's really important that even if you feel that your life has been rustled up with various circumstances, that you commit to good sleep habits and you ensure that you're doing everything to support your body in order for the sleep hormones to be fully supported. And we will cover that in the next part, which is all about helpful strategies. These are some of the other ways in which you find that you will have your vibration dragged down if you're tapping into unhelpful ways, I guess, to get a little bit of a boost and a feel-good vibe. It can actually attract more of the negatives into your life, such as gossiping. So we all like to feel that there are others out there that can take our mind off our own faults and our own circumstances. But when we find ourselves leaning into this in some of our friendships and our relationships, all of the chat seems to centre around a gossiping kind of tone, then we feel that in order to connect with these individuals, this is a zone you have to get into on a regular basis. And when we get into this zone, of course, it's that whole saying that you need to make sure your plate's clean. Not so much that you will be in the firing line, but more that you will be more critical, more anxious about your own worries, and more anxious about your own reputation and how others perceive you. So it really drags you into that zone of what you're giving out, you may receive back. So it will actually build more of a fear and more of a fixation, I guess, on being perfect and striving for an unachievable perfection. Sometimes we find ourselves seeking out a purpose and I guess a release of stress and a release of anger and emotions and frustration. And although it's really good to be part of initiatives, especially bringing community together and representing those that are more vulnerable and being a voice, it's always been something that helps to have purpose and to, I guess, stick up for the underdog or stick up for yourself and express yourself. But what can happen is if we lean too much into this zone, then we can become quite fixated on activities. We're driven by that focus of conflict and debate and finding fault. I guess these are anger triggering situations. And as you know, we want to raise the vibrations. So if we're tapping into these anger or conflict scenarios quite often, it can end up polluting our entire vibration. And it's just important to balance that out, and just as important to remember to step back and have an acceptance, contribute in your own way, but don't get overly fixated on things that are out with your control to raise your own standards and raise your vibration. A huge one is overexposing yourself to media. Many people love to stay in touch with everything that's going on, and it's a vast world now when it comes to news and staying up to date, keeping in the know, especially those that like to be up to date with political situations and like to stay informed. There is another slant to this where we can end up overly indulging, and if we don't really protect ourselves and discipline ourselves and limit these exposures to media or social platforms, what we're actually doing is we're handing over our energy. On a regular basis and asking these platforms and asking the media to tell us how we should feel. So it's important to shield yourself, important not to let yourself get dragged into these vibes. It's important to remember that behind everything in life there is a motive and there is an aim, and the media industry has been trained in such a way to use various focuses in order to instill a reaction, and keeping this at the back of the mind without a hate for the media, but just an acknowledgement that that's their role, and much the same as the roles that we have in our life. We have aims and objectives, and so do they, and keeping this in mind, what is it that they're trying to conjure up, what emotion, what state. And it's important to remain calm, to give yourself perspective, and to protect your inner peace. You might want to allocate someone that you know in your family or your friendship group and just let them know that you're making a conscious effort to limit the amount of time that you're going to spend watching the news, listening to the news, following certain platforms, and your exposure to social media is going to be greatly reduced, placing an emphasis on your time and your energy being precious, as well as shielding your own aura from what's being projected. So if you put that out to your designated person, place your trust in that person so that you do still have an avenue to being kept informed and in the loop. You've protected yourself, you've set limitations, but you've also made sure that you're kept in the loop, and you've handed this over to someone that you know and you trust in order to communicate these things to you should it be required.